So I'm a big fan of rather than reading somebody's bio, but really letting folks talk about themselves, the work that they do. And this is just for anyone. Can you sort of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work that you do? And maybe start with Jeff.
Sure, I'm Jeff McIlwain. I perform and produce as Lusine, just kind of electronic music. I also do some work on film scores, some composition stuff.
I'm Erik Blood. I'm a solo artist and a producer. Probably most known for my work with Shabazz Palaces, The Satisfaction, and the Moondoggies.
I'm Jack Endino, producer, engineer, persistent musician in the face of insurmountable odds, and been doing it since 1986, and best known for some records that weren't that significant at the time I did them. Actually, one of them was the Bleach record by Nirvana, which blew up a few years later, and then a bunch of records in South America. There was a whole bunch of the early Sub Pop records that I recorded, and still doing it, and still playing in some bands.
I would, what the first question for this panel is sort of if you can just discuss a little bit some of the early records that you listened to that sort of shaped the way in which you approach production, some of the stuff that really influenced you, that sort of led you to be a producer, and that's a question for anyone.
Well, I think I kind of started off sort of in the pop realm, but maybe sort of verging on electronic stuff like Depeche Mode and Nine Inch Nails and whatnot, but got introduced to sort of the more experimental side of things. So like, early Autechra and, like Speedy J and Adam Hart and stuff like that. And then sort of also got influenced by things from some of the indie rock friends that I had. So like the Sea and Cake, My Bloody Valentine, Stereo Lab, stuff like that.
Music was always in my house, so Motown and Phil Spector stuff was always around and always in my head. But when I started making music and recording music, it was Public Enemy and My Bloody Valentine that really shaped how I did my thing.
Well, I grew up in the 70s, and so that meant the Beatles and Led Zeppelin were everywhere. So there was all that stuff, but I was also a big fan of early 70s R&B and funk. The first records I bought were 7 inches. And then, I sort of plunged into psych and weird garage rock, and I just became a fanatical record collector for years and years and years. And then at some point, I sort of became a record producer, and all these weird influences came out. And yeah, what else can I say?
Can you discuss some of your early mentors or folks that potentially help you find your way into the field in terms of music and production?
For me, it was a guy named Bubba Jones who basically let me work in his studios. He had a studio above Jones Music Shop on Rainier. And he allowed me to use his gear and do whatever I wanted to do. So it was recording bands and making whatever music I could make.
Jeff?
Early on for my own music, most of my mentor kind of stuff was my friends, just kind of telling me how to get started making electronic music, because this was early 90s, so it was a lot of hardware kind of sequencer stuff, But as far as any other mentors that kind of got me started, I worked for a composer in LA named Ed Shermer, and kind of learned a lot about scoring and stuff with him. So,
Well, I was mostly self-taught, but my first real mentor was the guy who gave me a leg up, as it were, was Chris Hanzik, who started Reciprocal Recording back in '84, lost the building in 8 months, and then sort of went indie for a while. And I met him when he was recording my own band for a compilation record called Deep Six. And he let me know that he was looking to reopen his studio. He's looking for a building. And I happened to know of a studio that had just gone out of business, Triangle Recording. And I said, hey, I know there's a building, and by the way, I would love to work in your studio. And so Chris and I became partners and reopened Reciprocal Recording in June of 1986. And it was a little 8-track studio, but he'd already done it for a while, so he was the guy who taught me to zero the board, zero the console, clean up the studio for the next guy. Basic studio etiquette that you don't learn when you're just starting out in a basement, which is what I had done up to that point. And he's still a mastering engineer now. He masters a lot of records for me.